Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. We have an author I'm very excited to speak with, and I will introduce in 1 second. Did want to give thanks, as always, to our sponsor, Chessable.com. As I mentioned in a previous pod, one of the most recommended books on in chess literature, in recent chess literature, is now on Chessable, Chess Structures. There's actually a free lesson available from Grandmaster Peter Hein Nielsen, who's done the video for it, so be sure to check that out. Sam Shanklin's got a new course. Ben Feingold's got one on the way. There's always tons of stuff worth checking out. And as always, if you sign up for Chessable Pro to unlock additional features, be sure to use the link in the description. As for our guest this week, so he's someone who's written a book that I was looking forward to. Some of you may have heard my interview in episode 342 with Grandmaster Simen Agdestein, who is, of course, one of the best Norwegian players of all time and was a professional footballer and then became Magnus's coach. Fascinating guy. And our guest has written a new book called Games and Goals, The Fascinating Chess and Football Careers of Simen Agdestein. He's also a Slavic Linguistics professor at the University of Oslo. He's an international master in his own right. He is a commentator and columnist and popular chess author in Norway. And I am excited to welcome to the program. Do they call you Dr. Atle Gronn or Mr.? How should I refer to you there?
Yeah, so in Germany, they would say doctor. In the US, maybe Mr. But in Norway, we just say Otle.
Okay. No, in the US, it would be doctor as well. But anyway, okay. Welcome. I'm excited to chat. And as I expected, I greatly enjoyed the book.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me.
Sure, my pleasure. Yeah, and Simen, of course, an endlessly fascinating character. So I was really excited to get your sort of firsthand perspective as someone who's known him or at least seen him since your teenage years, Atle. So you described him in your interview on the New in Chess podcast as a mythic figure in the early days. Now you've gone on, of course, to become collaborators and friends. But what was it in those teenage years that made Simen mythic?
Yes, Simen has always been there in my chess life because already when he joined my club in 1982, he came from another club. Then he was already the Norwegian champion for adults. He was only 15 years old. I was 4 years older, and of course I was a much weaker chess player. But I was hooked on chess, and I looked upon Simen as a demigod in chess, and he was my hero from the very start. And for me, he was a mythical figure because he completely ignored me. So I was younger, I was so much weaker, so I was not an interesting person for him then, and therefore we had this asymmetrical relationship. And I think everybody in Norwegian chess had an asymmetrical relationship with Simen because he was so much better than everybody else, and he stood above everybody else.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, like especially people who played chess scholastically. Anyone who's at the top of the list for the age group, you always know who they are, whether they know who you are or not. And you wrote in the book that he was obsessed with chess when he discovered it. Of course, he comes from a chess family. His brother, Espen, strong player in his own right, who became Magnus's manager, and his dad, of course, a mainstay at your chess club. But you wrote that he got very good in like a 4-year span. What do you think? Like, how did he do that?
Yeah, so Simen actually got hooked on chess a bit late. He was 11 years old, which is late for our days. But when he got hooked, he got really hooked, and he couldn't think about anything else for a couple of years. And at that time, he was in the perfect environment because he had 3 elder brothers who were both strong chess players, and his father was a strong amateur. And I think especially the fact that he could play blitz with Espen all day, all night long was so helpful. So Espen Agdestein, his brother, was like internet is today. You always have an opponent.
Right.
And Simen was, in a sense, the only person in Norway who had access to this internet thing, the permanent opponent. And that, of course, helped him. And it also helped Espen, of course. So Simen's progress was immense. And he went from nothing to becoming the best Norwegian player in only 4 years.
Yeah, of course, broke the record, which I guess apparently was just broken yesterday, or at least
No, it wasn't broken.
Okay.
So Steven still has the record.
Okay, yeah. So for listeners not sure, I was just reading this morning, a little groggy. It's I'm still processing my coffee here, but a young player won the Norwegian national championship that just completed. Could you tell us a bit about that since it's come up?
Yeah, that is actually one of Simen's students today. So Aksel Buchwald, he became the Norwegian champion last week, a bit sensationally. He's only 15 years and 11 months old. But Simen became champion when he was 15 years and 7 months old.
Okay.
So Simen still has the record from 1982. But it's amazing that Aksel, this young 15-year-old player, actually beat all the favorites. So in the field you have Jon Ludvig Hammer and many of the strong Norwegian players. But still a 15-year-old who has worked with Simen for a couple of years already, took the title. Simen was not participating this time.
Yeah, Tarjei, I was going to ask you about that. Tarjei reported that he missed this year's national championship. Of course, when I interviewed him last year, it was in the wake of becoming the oldest Norwegian national champion. But he missed this year because he's been competing in Mesteren Mester, an immensely popular Norwegian reality show. So what happens on that reality show, if you're familiar with it?
It's true that this show is immensely popular, and it's I think it's by far the most popular show in Norway. So they gather old athletes from different sports, and they compete in all kinds of sports and with all kinds of exercises. And in the end, there is a winner, and it's a nice program because it also has this nostalgic thing that you get to see your old sports heroes, and Simen is one of them.
I like it. And I'm curious, of course, him being, as you mentioned in the book, one of the only people in history that's been, I don't know if we would call him a world-class athlete, but certainly one of the best in his country when it came to football, and a world-class chess player. Are there mental games on this show as well, or is it strictly physical?
There are some mental puzzles as well, but these puzzles are always combined with physical stuff. So, for instance, you do some heavy physical exercises, and then you get this puzzle to solve, right? When you're really exhausted.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And you wrote in the book, because it was interesting. Obviously, I knew a bit more about his chess than his football, but you make him sound almost really like an accidental elite athlete, like much more so than chess. Like he could just run really fast and was naturally strong. Is that accurate?
Yeah, he was an amazing runner, and if we should pick one talent of his in sports, it's running. So he could probably have been one of the best Norwegian runners of all time. And this ability to run fast, and this endurance, and this, I mean, his brother Espen describes him as a physical god. I mean, he was a Greek god, Simen's physics, unlike some other chess players.
Like many chess players.
Yeah. But this actually made him also a very good footballer. But in football, he was known for his running abilities, and he was a better runner than all other Norwegian footballers. But concerning this talent for sports, he excelled in every sport when he was young. He was also a very good skier, cross-country skiing, which is popular in Norway. And he was basically good at everything. And he didn't consider himself, when he was young, as a footballer. This came later. So football was only one of 5-6 sports which he would do regularly.
And you mentioned somewhere he wasn't like great at handling the ball necessarily. Like it was all sort of natural.
Yeah, so that is part of not being. I mean, he wasn't particularly interested in football, but
right.
So compared to other true football nerds, he didn't have this natural football technique. So it was quite a. But also at the football pitch, he was a myth because suddenly he was at the national team in football, and everybody was surprised. Who is this guy? We don't even know this guy. Why is he here? But that was because some of the best football trainers in Norway, they saw that he had this unique talent for running, and he was strong. So he was a constant threat to the other team just because of his physique and his running abilities. And they thought that this was so unique for Norwegian football that he would be a very good player on the field, and so it was. He was indeed very good, but he had a very original style at the football pitch,
which he did in chess as well. You wrote.
Yeah, certainly, and so my competence in chess is much bigger than in football, and in chess I indeed think that he is very underestimated, and his talent was enormous, and we can talk about his chess much later, right? But in football, I don't know if you follow European football, but there is this Norwegian guy Haaland, Erling Haaland, which is who plays for Manchester City and is a superstar now. And in fact, Simen's football style reminds a little bit about Haaland's style, because they have this incredible physique more than technique. And some of his coaches at that time in the 80s, they told me when I interviewed them for the book that Simen could have become the best Norwegian footballer also, because he had this his talent was so unique. But of course there was this problem that he wasn't particularly good with the ball.
Minor detail, yeah. And you tell a great story in the book of, so obviously was obsessed with chess, as you mentioned, as a teenager, although like for a lot of us, the relationship maybe became a little more love-hate as the years went on. But with football, as you describe, it was, as we said, somewhat accidental. But you tell a story of him going to a big game and not even knowing who they were playing.
Yeah, that's a famous story. So, and there are many such stories from his football career. And he never followed football, so he didn't go to see other teams playing, and he didn't follow football on television. So he knew very little about football, and he actually gave up football when he was 20 in 1988. He just decided that I've had enough of it. I don't care about it anymore. And then he kind of accidentally came back to football, and a few months later he was on the national team.
Accidentally on the national team. Go on.
Yeah. So it's the football story in itself is quite extraordinary, and there are parallels there in concerning the chess story, because he also had this strange relationship with chess, right? From 11 to 15, he was really hooked on chess. That's true. But then when he already was a national star, national celebrity, his relationship with chess was more problematic, because he felt this loneliness at the top, and he was very unsure what to do with his life, and he wasn't really happy being a superstar, which he became very early in Norway.
Yeah, one quote that you wrote that really resonated was, Simen was the only person in Norway who'd been so naturally gifted in such contrasting ways. What no one could understand, though, was how everything was held together in a fragile body and psyche.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, and that is precisely why I find this, why I find it interesting to write this book, is that he's a very complex personality, and from the outside one could think that he has everything, right?
Exactly.
Everything we dream of.
Yeah.
He has his amazing chess talent, and has his amazing physique, and is a top footballer, etc. But Simen was much more concerned with his own inner feelings and his inner demons, and to actually become a happy man, and that was his challenge, right? And we couldn't see that from the outside at the time.
Yeah, and there's a real life lesson there, and I think that's what makes this story just sort of endlessly fascinating to me. We should mention, by the way, that your work, even though your English is great, was translated by Grandmaster Jonathan Tisdall, friend of the pod, and he did an excellent job. with that as well. Atle, you discussed with Dirk-Jan, you went into the sort of the history of your collaboration a bit, because obviously you got tremendous access to Simen. For listeners who didn't catch that interview yet, maybe you could discuss how it is that you guys agreed to collaborate on this book.
Yeah, so after all these years, when Simen was mainly my hero, right, and I followed every chess move he would make, but I didn't really have access to him because of the age difference and the difference in playing strength. Then much later we became close friends, and then one day, it was in 2019, 5 years ago, we kind of accidentally met downtown Oslo on the street, and we started talking, and we just stood there talking for half an hour, 40 minutes, and at the end of this talk, I think we had decided that I should write this book, but I don't really recall who came up with the idea, but I think both of us had this idea in the back of our head that could be a possibility, and then I decided to do it, and so the collaboration was very close, with a great mutual trust between us. But I decided that I would enjoy this project. I didn't do it for the money. I understood that there wasn't money in it in any case. But I decided I would do it in my own pace, and I spent 4 years working on the book.
Amazing. Yeah. And one detail that's important is you got access to his diaries and his journals. How did that come about?
Yeah, that was a true treasure trove and completely unexpected, because Simen, at one day he phoned me and he said that in my attic, in my childhood home, I have some boxes with some material, chess material, so maybe you're interested in having a look. And I said, sure, come with it. And he came to my office at the university with 12 big boxes. And I had these boxes in my office for 4 years. And it turned out that there was so much interesting material here, and so much personal stuff. And through this material, I really got access to his mind and his mindset when he was 20 years old, when he was at his top, because it turned out that he had written his own personal diary, but he had forgotten about it. And when he gave me the boxes, he didn't check for the content, what is in these boxes. So here I could find love letters and all kinds of stuff. And it was really fun digging into the boxes. So I could see, for instance, score sheets, Simen playing Kasparov, Simen playing Tal, Simen playing Karpov. And I found all these things, and I found a lot of pictures. Many of the pictures are in the book. But I think the most valuable thing was the diary, which he primarily wrote in hotel rooms after the games. Because at that time, in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have mobile phones or the internet. So what would you do when you're alone after a long game in the hotel room? There's not much to do, and Simen would work on his own his own psyche and write his diary notes in after these games. And these diary notes feel so authentic and true because he writes them only for himself to read, right? So he's completely honest. And I get then 30 years later, I get access to his true thoughts during these tournaments. And that was for me so valuable as a biographer to have these notes.
Yeah, I mean, and as you say, just incredibly personal stuff, ranging from love letters, reflections on relationships, proclamations that he could be world champion, and so on. Was there anything that he said you couldn't include?
No, and that was very nice and part of the mutual trust between us. But also, it was part of the part of the story is that he didn't know the content himself, and he had completely forgotten about all these love letters, right? I mean, any other person would be very cautious about giving away such material, right? But no, he said that if you can use it, use it. But he himself, when he gave me the boxes, he didn't think that whatever was in these boxes would be so valuable. But when I compare these notes with his memories today of the same time, I see that these notes are more authentic, because what you remember today, looking back on what happened 30 years ago, is much more random than these authentic notes written right after the games were being played in the hotel.
Yeah, of course. An absolute, like you say, a treasure trove, just an amazing thing to encounter. And you mentioned earlier, you touched on his chess style. We should say, I like the way you handled the chess. You wrote it for a general audience in the book. So there are chess diagrams, but they're very sort of simplified. And you definitely, for any listeners wondering, you definitely don't need a chess set to read this book. It's 95% prose, and the diagrams are pretty simple. But for listeners less familiar with the ins and outs of Simen's game, how would you describe his chess style?
It's a very unique style. It's non-theoretical. It doesn't mean that Simen doesn't know a lot of chess theory or chess history, but Simen has always emphasized the battle at the board, and chess as a sport, not as a science. So the battle should be decided at the board. So one characteristic story is when he played the Karpov in 1992, and he had actually prepared for this meeting with Karpov some months in advance. He knew about this match, and then Karpov opened the first game of the match with one e4, and I was in the audience there, and Simen started thinking.
Right.
And he thought for 11 minutes, I think, before he played e6. And this is typical of Simen. He wants the fight to be at the board. And when amateurs tell me that, no, I cannot compete in that tournament next week because I haven't prepared and things like that, then I think about Simen, because Simen would always emphasize the importance of chess being a thinking process at the board and not before the game, right? So he is, in that sense, he is not a slave of chess theory, and he has this original style. He's very creative. He's a very good calculator, but he has some strengths which are also, in a sense, weaknesses. For instance, he's very materialistic, and this he has in common with Kachnoi. And what they would do is that they will, if you can take a pawn, they will start calculating.
Right.
And if they don't see a refutation, they will take the pawn no matter what. While Carlsen and other more people with maybe better intuition and more positional understanding would not take the pawn on general grounds. But Simen and also Kachnoi, they are very concrete because they are so good calculators.
Yeah, but Magnus, of course, his childhood, when Magnus was a child, his student, and you do describe some definite imprints, which you call the Norwegian school of chess. Could you define that for us?
Yeah, so there are a lot of commonalities also between Simen and Magnus. Not so much maybe in the moves themselves, because Magnus is he relies much more on intuition. But their approach to the game is very similar in many respects. So one thing is that, as I said, you should not be a slave of theory. You should play everything. And this also goes for Magnus. He can play any opening. Of course, Magnus is much more universal than Simen was, but Simen at the time before the computers, he was also kind of universal. He was not afraid of trying new things. And Simen gave very early this advice to Magnus that if you know your opening, then you should play something different. Right. Which is for adult learners and improvers, that is an impossible advice, right? If you know something, then you shouldn't do it. So Simen's point, which Magnus kind of agreed with, is that you should always try to improve, and this you could do if you try something you're not familiar with, and then you are forced to learn new things at the board. And maybe this will not have good effects short term on your results, but it was clear with Magnus that the long term effects were extremely good, right? So Magnus feels at home in any position.
Yeah. And there was also, as I talked about with Simen and has been documented many times, I mean, he had this flexibility that he carries forward to this day where, you know, a lot of people might look at the success that Simen and some of his students in Norway, most prominently Magnus, have had and think that he had some system in place. But it's the tailor opposite. He's just do what you enjoy, you know. Yeah.
And that is also very important part of the Norwegian chess school, that you should, a very common advice is that you should do your training in a structured manner. But the Norwegian school is the opposite. It should not be structured, because the idea here is that you learn even better if you enjoy what you're doing. So do whatever you want, as long as it concerns chess. Play whatever opening you want. Work on any game you want, as long as it has something to do with chess. If you really enjoy the process, you will learn so much more efficient. And this was this idea came also from Simen's train of thought, and it was clearly adapted by Magnus. So although Magnus, unlike for instance Karjakin or the Soviet chess school, he wouldn't work on chess for 8 hours a day, but he would still very efficiently think about chess for many hours every day, or even when he didn't have a chessboard or a computer, because different positions would be there in his head, which he would enjoy thinking about.
Yeah, and I guess this is as good a time as any to hear your story. You played Magnus once, right, in 2005?
Yeah, I played him actually. I played him twice in serious tournament games, and some blitz games.
So he was what, 14?
Yeah, in 2005 he was 14, and then I played him in the Norwegian championship.
When was that? I couldn't find that.
That was in 2005, summer of 2005.
Oh, same year. Okay.
Yeah, so that was a very fond memory of mine, because so it was the final round of the Norwegian championship, and I was actually playing quite decently in that championship. Already after 7 rounds, I had secured my IM norm with 2 rounds to spare, and then I met Simen in round 8, and I lost a very tough game to Simen, and I played Magnus in round 9.
Tough tournament.
Yeah. And Magnus and Simen, they were fighting for first place, and so indirectly I had I was also part of this fight for first place, and I was black against Magnus, and I played a bit provocatively in the opening because I wanted him to sacrifice material. I had this idea that if I can get him to sacrifice some material, then I have something to play for.
Right. Yeah.
I wanted to test him. He was only 14 years old, and he was only rated 100 points above me. So I mean, it wasn't completely unthinkable that I could make a draw or whatever. And then, but I immediately noticed, of course, that the attention of the audience was glued to this game, and the atmosphere was really intense. And Magnus was, I felt like playing Morphy or Tal, maybe more Morphy, because he was so. The way he sacrificed a knight against me on move 17, I think. He did it almost without thinking. It was so intuitive, and he even didn't care to sit at the board.
Right.
He was wandering. He was walking around, talking to his friends, and then I was sitting there glued to the board. And then he came, and then he just did this movement with his hand, sacrificed his knight, and moved and got away from the board again. I was so deeply impressed sitting there, and I enjoyed it immensely. But I was also then the editor of the Norwegian chess magazine, and I understood that this was almost like an immortal game.
Yeah,
it was so beautiful, and then I let him deliver the mate on move 24, I think, which was a beautiful mate. So he had sacrificed two pieces and mated me on the middle of the board, and it was really beautiful. And on the internet, people thought that I hadn't seen the mate and made fun of me and things like that. But of course, I, as a chess writer, I understood that, okay, this is such a nice game that I should let him actually carry out the mate.
Amazing story. And you wrote in the book, of course, somewhat famously, Simen, from almost the first time he saw Magnus, told his dad, this guy could be world champion someday, and famously pulled aside people like Uta Polgar to tell them the same thing, unsolicited at the first opportunity. But you wrote in the book that you were initially skeptical that he could reach that level.
Yeah, sure. I was skeptical. I'm much more rational than Simen, right? So Simen believes in these crazy ideas that Magnus could become the world champion, for instance. But of course, with my rationality and more academic approach, I thought it was complete nonsense. But I understood that so now we're talking about Magnus at the age of 11. So then he was, or maybe 12. So he was good, but he was clearly not at the level of Karjakin,
who was his age, right?
Yeah, and but Simen had this. Simen saw all the way. Simen saw the potential, right? So, and in hindsight, it's true that Magnus' potential was so great simply because he had so many weaknesses. So Simen saw all these weaknesses, and I also saw the weaknesses in Magnus' play, and therefore but I didn't see the potential. I understood that he could be top 10 maybe in the world, but I couldn't understand that he would dominate the chess world for 15 years like he did. But Simen saw it immediately. He already saw it in January 2000 when Magnus was 9 years old, and Magnus played one of his first tournaments at Gausdal, and Magnus failed to win a game with a rook up, and Simen. That was when Simen first saw Magnus, and he immediately said to his father that I can turn Magnus into a grandmaster before he's 14. So Simen started believing in Magnus immediately. Although we others, we could say that, well, this guy can't even win with a rook up. So how good is he really? But Simen saw all the strong sides and the weak sides, and he said that we can work on the weak points, and then he will become tremendously strong.
And when did he win you over, Magnus?
When I started believing that he could become number one.
Yeah.
So I was still a bit skeptical when he beat me in 2005, actually, because 2005 was maybe the only bad year in Magnus' biography. He dropped some rating points that year. But when he was 16, 17, a couple of years later, and he was already top 5 in the world. And his play he was much more universal than the other players like Karjakin or his competitors at his age. So then I started believing in it, but quite late.
And his dad was also a regular at your chess club, right?
No, that we're not talking about two different chess clubs.
Okay.
But Magnus' dad was playing in Simen's first chess club.
Okay.
So there's a funny story in the book about Simen being 11 years old and beating Magnus' dad. And when they met 20 years later, more than 20 years later, and Simen got to know Magnus, he didn't recognize Magnus' dad from these early chess encounters. But Magnus' dad, of course, knew very well who Simen was.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and it's great that you go through the Agdestein family history, both on his mom's and his dad's side, and then eventually, obviously, the Carlsens come in, and that intertwines as well. I mean, there's so much in Simen's life that I find of interest. But one thing we didn't touch on yet that I did discuss with Simen a little bit is the sort of dark years. So, I mean, as you say, this unbelievable from the outside just seems too good to be true life of being a top 20 chess player, tangling with Kasparov, and then jetting off to play professional football on the national team. Not as charmed as it seems from the inside. But then, of course, he had this knee injury that affected both careers. So what happened in those years?
Yeah, so that was around 1991, his first knee injury, and then a second one in 1992. So Simen was at that time 23, 24 years old. He was at his top. He was a superstar in Norway, very famous in Norway, a real superstar. And then everything went down from there. In the chess community, we thought that this knee injury was a blessing because then he could finally play chess, right? So we were a bit upset that he would not prioritize chess, but also play football. But it turned out that this made him so depressed, and his inner demons took over, and he was really on a very, very low point in life for many years. This black hole which he found himself in was much worse than we thought from the outside, and it's only now in hindsight and reading his diaries and hearing the story from Simen himself that I realized how bad it was. So it turns out that maybe especially for the Norwegian chess school, if you have physical problems, you will also have problems with your chess. And that makes sense from the Norwegian point of view of the Norwegian chess school, because with Agdestein and Carlsen, the focus is also on physical endurance during games, and this is why they are so good in the end game. So they manage to keep up the concentration for so many hours, but especially Simen, but also Magnus. Has a much better physique than many of the other competitors. And this is true of Magnus today, but it was especially true of Simen in the 80s. So, of course, Simen sitting there with the Tal or Kachnoi.
Right.
I mean, and you compare the physique, it's like two completely different sports.
Yeah, and you also, as you've mentioned, like Simen with the concrete style, time trouble addict, like you really need to be firing on all cylinders. And yeah, I wanted to mention earlier when you told the story about playing Karpov and thinking for 11 minutes, as someone who struggled with time trouble myself and reading about Simen constantly being in time trouble, it's just so vexing when someone does something like that, you know. It just seems so unnecessary. But you can't pick and choose. Like for someone to be an elite talent, you take everything, you know. You can't. But it's fascinating. And so during those years, he eventually had to give up both for all practical purposes.
Well, he didn't have to give up chess, but in practice he also gave up chess, right? So because he didn't have the motivation to play, and it's true that maybe he had to add some, maybe also had to because he complained that his head was not working anymore either, right? So yeah, it's, and this is, for me today, this is a very interesting part of Simen, that it's a story with it's a story which is very human in a sense, because with all these ups and downs,
Yeah.
right? And it's not a story about a superhero who succeeds in everything. So if this would be a Magnus biography, it would be a completely different story, because then the progress is almost linear to the top, and he succeeds in everything. But this is more recognizable for readers, because it's what life is all about. And it's interesting for me today to see that, and this is also what the Norwegian readers tell me, that in the Norwegian chess community, that they didn't know that things were so bad with Simen. And in fact, his life was more miserable than the lives of the rest of us, right?
Right, which, you had a good line about that in the book.
And that makes it, for me, interesting, because there are, of course, also a lot of good stories and a lot of positive, good memoirs and positive experiences. But there are also all these problematic things, which maybe I can, just to illustrate, show the difference between the Norwegian book and the English book.
Sure.
Yeah, because
it's much longer, right? Or go ahead.
No, it's not longer. But the English version focuses on the unique combination of football and chess.
Mm-hmm.
So the English version is actually longer, because we have included his best chess games as an appendix.
Yeah, which is nice. Yeah.
So we have the title, games, and goals, where goals also points to his life goals, right? Not only football goals. But then the Norwegian version is different. So there is less focus on chess, and also less focus on football, but more focus on the existential crisis. And this photograph from 1984, I think is very nice, and the Norwegian title is also very different from the English one. So here the focus is on the existential struggle of being a chess player.
Okay.
And this is something we can all we recognize ourselves in this story, because we all, at least for anyone who has tried to play chess or spend a lot of time playing chess tournaments, sitting there in your hotel room after a loss, you feel this, you get all these existential questions. And here I think you see it very clearly from Simen's expression. He's only 16 years old here.
Yeah.
But you see all the doubts. And he's a star in Norway at this time. But you see that this young man is maybe not perfectly happy, but at least he's thinking, and he's pondering about rather serious questions.
Yeah, it's a great photo for those of you listening on audio. Yeah, it's worth Googling the Norwegian version, or I'll put a link to it. And could you translate? What would be the word for word translation of the title from Norwegian to English?
Yeah, the Norwegian title doesn't work in English, but it works in Norwegian, and the title is The Chess That Was. The reason it doesn't work for an international audience is that if you say The Chess That Was, it could be Morph or Botvinnik or whatever. But in a Norwegian context, The Chess That Was, since in Norway everybody associates chess today with Magnus, right?
Right.
And maybe also with computers.
Okay.
Yeah. So for a Norwegian audience, if you use the past tense was, it means that we take the chess before Magnus and before the computers. And what you get then you don't get much except for Simen.
Right.
Because Simen is kind of, he's not the starting point in Norwegian chess, but he's a big name before Magnus. And you also get this nice transition to Magnus. So Magnus is definitely a part of the book because Simen was the one who discovered Magnus and was Magnus one of Magnus' first trainers. So you get the Magnus part, but this title points to is very nostalgic and tells a story about the chess environment before Magnus and before the computers, and through the most enigmatic and interesting and strongest Norwegian chess player.
Yeah, just fascinating. And returning to what we alluded to, the years where his knee gave out, and as you say, his brain was in a fog, and he was having trouble breathing. So his chess went to the wayside as well. And as I talked about with Simen, I mean, he was reasonably well compensated, and his father had a good career. So in his early years, he was not destitute, but certainly he left some money on the table, turning down a contract from a Turkish football club. And then you write that he ended up getting support from the state in his 20s when he was injured?
Yeah. So he was really at the lowest point where he lost all his incomes from football, but he also couldn't write his daily chess column in the biggest Norwegian newspaper. So at one point he was financially dependent on the state, so this was, of course, I guess he could have asked his father for money because his father was quite a rich man, I think. But this was Simen when he was 25, and he was there alone without money and without income, and his physical condition was so bad that he couldn't do anything.
Amazing. But he picked himself up.
Yeah, but it took some years. So then one lucky turning point was that he met his now ex-wife Marianne, and they got children. That was in the middle of the 90s. So a couple, and then the next turning point was when he started in 1998. He started the Norwegian. He started his chess branch at the Norwegian Academy for Sports. And eventually then Magnus and all the other Norwegian chess players became students at his academy, and still to this day he is teaching chess at the academy.
Yeah, and thriving. It's amazing to see. And you wrote that, so he was not doing well financially in those years and getting support, but then eventually he has some investment properties in addition to his work. So I was curious if what changed in that respect that he was able to have some financial success.
Yeah, that is that is a part of Simen which is very different from me. I would never do such things, but Simen comes from a family where Simen is actually a bit annoyed that there is so much focus on money and in his family, and many of the people there are successful. So today Espen is successful, and his brother, former manager of Magnus, but his father was also successful. Simen was not successful in that sense, but financially, but he had some of the same talent still. So he would still take loans in the bank and buy apartments. So today he has 4 apartments or something like that. And it turned out that all these investments were very lucrative.
Okay.
so we had a nice flair for it.
He's accidentally good at so many things.
Yeah. And there is one story. I think at that point he had 3 apartments. And one chess player called him and said that I want to do the same thing you do. So you have these 3 apartments, and this is very profitable for you. Can you find me an apartment that I can buy to also make profit? And Simen said, sure. And he found an apartment for his friend, and he called him back and said, "No, you should buy this apartment, and you will profit from it." But then his friend, the chess player, got cold feet and said no. And then Simen said, "Okay, then I'll buy it myself." And he took another loan in the bank and bought the apartment, and it was also very profitable in the end. So now he has 4 apartments, right?
Oh, wow, that's funny.
So it is, yeah, that is part of, I guess, being an Agdestein.
That's amazing. And Atle, as we finish up, let's discuss your chess a little bit. So, in your interview with Dirk-Jan, you discussed your affinity for chess literature. Big Sasanko fan, as I am. Are you still keeping up with what comes out these days?
Yeah, I think my interest for chess literature is just grows and grows, and yeah, I'm reading more and more these days. I realize that if I haven't read physical chess books or during the day, then that means that I have spent too much time on the internet, and that makes me depressed. So I try to read as much as I can, and I constantly read like 10 books simultaneously.
Oh, wow.
In various languages. So indeed, I read a lot, and I realize that what I like the most about chess these days is reading and writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I read also because I need inspiration for my own writing, right?
Yeah.
So it's and I have some chess columns which I write, and I write my chess books from time to time. So, but of course, I use the internet as everybody does. But I realize that to get deeper into the story, it's very good to have a physical book with the whole story.
Yeah.
And then you can check some details on the internet later.
Well said. And correct me if I'm wrong, were your prior books, they were written in Norwegian, correct?
Yeah. So I have, I wrote 2 books. I can show them. So the first one is a chess memoir. It's called Chess or Life. And the second one is called Chess Geniuses. It's about the world champions.
Okay.
And then the Simen book was my third book. And yeah, I'm not sure if I will write or when I will write my next book, because this is not my main occupation, but it's my main hobby.
Okay. Yeah, and I discussed recently with Solveig Friberg the sort of what to me is an interesting dichotomy between sort of the vast popularity of chess as like a spectator sport in Norway versus it still seems pretty niche in terms of people actually competing. So I'm curious, when you write books like that, are you targeting the vast audience, or are you targeting the hardcore chess people?
No, I'm targeting both. So the hardcore chess people, that's a quite small community in Norway. So, but I think there are. So we are only 5 million people, but there are 2 million people. 2 million Norwegians who follow chess to some extent,
which is amazing.
And if I can, so I can say I target 100,000 of these chess fans, right? And my books it's a bit strange maybe for an international audience to hear it, but I think my books in Norwegian, they sell much more than the average English chess book, simply because I target the general audience, and yeah, so my books have been quite successful in Norway.
That's great. And you said, so the one about world champions, obviously it's fairly intuitive what it covers. The second one, the first one you said is more of a memoir, or?
Yeah, so it's a bit, maybe it's a bit it's what I find fascinating in the chess world. So it can be about chess and art, chess and philosophy, chess and mathematics, chess and language, which is something I'm very much interested in. So it's a bit about everything that I find fascinating about chess, but not the moves themselves.
Right.
So
Okay.
you don't learn anything by reading the book in that sense, but you learn a lot about the chess culture in a broad sense.
Okay. And how many languages do you speak?
Well, I can answer concretely and say that I have read a chess book in 10 different languages.
Oh my goodness. That's crazy.
But my strength is not necessarily the practical speaking, right? So it's when I was an active chess player myself, my strength was actually chess theory and working on chess more than being a practical player. And I think the same goes for me as a linguist, that I can work on the grammatical structure. It doesn't mean that I'm so tremendously good at speaking all these languages, but I do speak now. And also thanks to chess, I do speak quite some languages. So my latest language is Ukrainian,
right?
Which I speak now, and I read a lot of chess books in Ukrainian.
Yeah, amazing. Your Norwegian Wikipedia page, which I could not read but was able to have translated, said that you picked that up in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, that's true. I started with Ukrainian 2 years ago, and yeah, I also now organize a Ukrainian course at the university with a Ukrainian teacher, but I'm the one who organizes it. And then when you get into a new language, this is my experience, it's very useful to read something you're interested in and something where you know the context. So for me, the obvious choice is whenever I go into a new language is to read chess books, and this is what I do with Ukrainian. So here is a recent one I am now reading about Ivanchuk. It's in Ukrainian, not in Russian. And so half a year ago, I searched heavily on the internet and bought all Ukrainian chess books I could find.
Amazing.
That's fun.
How is the Ivanchuk book? You told a couple. I mean, of course, there's so many, but you told a couple funny Ivanchuk stories in your book.
Yeah, so this one I read very recently, so it's not included in my book. It's quite fascinating. It's written by a journalist called Kozak, and it's called in Ukrainian Sviti Vasilia Ivanchuka, which means the two worlds of Ivanchuk. And the idea of the author is that so you have the Ivanchuk, the chess player, but you also have he also wants to describe Ivanchuk, the philosopher, the thinker, in a sense, or the Ivanchuk, the human being, and it's so he has this duality in the book, which is, I think it's a good thing, because there are so many myths about Ivanchuk also. So we have this myth that he is only focused on chess. But here you get the Ukrainian perspective from inside, and telling also about Ivanchuk's interest in literature and many stories about his relatives and his childhood, and a lot of interesting things.
Sounds fascinating. Yeah, I mean, Ivanchuk is just one of those people who all chess players just find, so compelling.
Sure.
So almost, maybe I'll learn the Ukrainian so that I can read it too. Although it would take me a little bit longer to pick it up than you, I think. And in reviewing my notes, I did think of one other question I had about Simen before I let you go. So, in his early 20s, as you describe, I mean, he's ascending to the world stage and getting opportunities to play the Korchnoys and the Karpovs of the world. But you wrote that around this point, he thought that he could be world champion, but if he worked half as hard as the elites. But he only worked 10% as hard. And I was curious because you did say at the beginning, when he was a kid and playing Espen all the time, he put in tons of hours. But it sounds like he lost that drive even when he was playing at an elite level.
Yeah, he kind of lost that drive. I think he was, from time to time, he was passionate about chess, but he was being extremely hooked on chess. You can say it was from 11 to 15, and then later when he was at his best, he practically didn't play at all. So in 1989, for instance, before his injury, this was the moment when he could, in my opinion, he would aspire to become number 3 in the world after Kasparov and Karpov. He was around number 16, but I think his potential was enormous. But then from January 89 to the summer of 89, he didn't play a single rated game. Then he became Nordic champion, and he played for the national football team against France. And 3 weeks later, he beat Ljubojevic, and he met Kasparov in Tilburg. Mm-hmm. That was 3 weeks after having played against France as a footballer. And as we know, France is quite a decent football nation. So this was when he was at his best, and he spent so little time on chess those days. But in his diary, sometimes when he occasionally played them, he could sometimes write in his diary that I should try to work harder on chess because I could become really good. And then sometimes he would write that when I finish this tournament, I will never play chess again.
Right.
And, he had both sides too.
Yeah, and as you alluded to in discussing your book, like very relatable, obviously, for like the level of talent is not relatable, but the love-hate relationship is.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fascinating, Atle. So definitely, as I mentioned, I highly recommend the book for listeners. It's called Games and Goals. It's on, it's coming in physical book to the United States. I think it's easier to get in Europe right now, but you can get it on the New in Chess reader like already. And we were unable to confirm if it will be on Kindle, but I'm guessing it will be. We will see. Any final thoughts, Atle?
No. So it has been a pleasure talking to you. So it's been great.
Okay, well, congratulations. Really enjoyed it. And you and Dirk-Jan discussed your next project a little bit in your interview. I look forward to whatever you end up settling on working on.
Thank you.